Testing, testing, testing. Yeah, that's great. So let us know when we should start, or should I wait for video?
To be used if you're using the headphone. You can begin whenever you're ready. He's
Okay.
ready for you.
Do you want to shut the door? Yes. Yeah, if you can just let Kushal know at the door he's going to come in and just guide him to the seat. Okay.
He's partially blind.
Okay. If you can just lead him in. Okay. Gracias.
Whenever you're ready, I'll stay over there and wait.
Okay, I'll just wait for him. Good morning. Welcome. Nisa Bolovinaka. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Fiji Blue Bond announcement and panel. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome the Fiji delegation, our panelists today, and to talk about this initiative by the Fiji government. Coming from a country which prides itself in its knowledge of rugby, one thing that I can say unequivocally is that when the Fiji nation tackles something that it's passionate about, what it produces is truly world class. And Fiji is a vulnerable nation. It is one of the island nations which is at the center of the climate change storm. But not only that, it has been hit incredibly hard by COVID for an economy which relies largely on tourism for some of its foreign exchange revenues. And Fiji is not only planning to spend money to adapt itself to the changes of climate change, but it's also meeting and exceeding its obligations in mitigating climate change for a country that has such a small contribution to climate change itself. So while Fiji is very far geographically, probably the furthest you can get from chilly Scotland, it is very close to our hearts. So it is with great pleasure that I firstly welcome Honourable Minister Ayaz Sayed Qayyum to come and introduce this initiative before we move on to the panel discussion. Thank you.
Bulavinaka, and a good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, the ministers who are here. That's the first time I've heard the rugby analogy used in this particular space. I have to tell you that we are very good in sevens, not as good in the 15s, though. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, thank you for joining us today as we mark our intention to issue the first blue bond in the Pacific. We're doing so here at COP26 for two reasons. Number one, investing in the blue economy is a no-brainer for Fiji. We are the 26th largest country by area of our exclusive economic zone, and we are home to 3.5% of the world's coral reefs. The protection of these ecosystems is a service to our citizens, our coming generations, and all of humanity. Secondly, in the context of both the pandemic and in the mounting climate crisis, our need to unlock new and additional resources to accelerate resilience building has never been more urgent. Our priorities obviously cannot wait, and this bond issuance is a means to accelerate our economy's net zero transition and increase our climate resilience. We are not only calling for additional financing for ocean issues while calling out the growing shortfalls in international climate financing, we are also doing all we can to create solutions at home for ourselves and in parallel to our efforts here in Glasgow. Finally, we are advocating for greater action and investment to accelerate the global effort to protect the ocean, understanding the indispensable resource it is to all humankind. To do so as a large ocean state, we need to ensure that our responsible stewardship of the ocean is strengthened and not weakened under the economic pressure we face. We need to ensure our vision is realized at home, not just described abroad. Fiji has committed to designating 30% of our exclusive economic zone as marine protected areas or MPAs by 2030. We have legislated this commitment as well as our commitment to sustainably manage 100% of our maritime areas. We have the will to do this, but even the best intentions, of course, can be stymied without dedicated financial resources. The Blue Bond concept marries these two pillars of Fiji's climate response: our desire to drive financial innovation and our advocacy for greater action to protect oceans. We know that capital markets and private sector investors need to play a greater role in the co-creation of sustainable business models. We need to transfer our maritime transport systems, increase the sustainability of our tourism sector, and sustainability of the fishing sector and mariculture sectors, and catalyze greater investment in the protection of coral reef, marine ecosystems, mangroves, and coastal zones. The IPCC's sixth assessment report provides a diagnosis that is unwelcome for any and all ecosystems. However, the fragility of ocean ecosystems and the potential for their collapse is in many senses exceptional. We can see and feel the approach of irreversible tipping points during our daily lives in the Pacific. We see it in the fish that we no longer see, the reefs we no longer explore, and their unrecognizable coastlines. That is the message we bring here, year in and year out. Humanity, our climate, our biodiversity, our history, and our culture are all ocean reliant, and ocean defined. And it comes as no surprise that our lifetime's greatest challenge, climate change, is closely interwoven with a direct threat to our oceans. Fiji's Blue Bond will draw on best practices and benefit from the range of partnerships and collaborations we have built through the Ocean Pathway Partnership. Through the welcome financial support provided by the UK government and technical assistance from the United Nations Development Programme and the UN Capital Development Fund, as well as oversight and coordination through our very own financial innovation think tank, the DRUA Incubator, supported and enabled by the generous assistance of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. We have a fantastic team in place to help realize the impact of the investments enabled through this proposed instrument. Investing now in sustainable energy for port infrastructure, in opportunities to increase the sustainability of our shipping sectors, in reducing the impact of existing infrastructure on the oceans, in improving the nature-based solutions that can be funded and enabled from tourism operations, is actually investing in the future. Our generation and our future generations need sustainable fisheries and ocean energy solutions, as well as industries that don't cost the earth. A blue economy also lends us economic resilience. COVID-19's decimation of our tourism industry underscored the need to widen Fiji's economic base, and we intend to do so in part through our primary industries, fisheries, forestry, and of course agriculture. And the benefits of what we achieve in Fiji, in fact, are not limited to our own shores. Transferability throughout the Pacific and beyond is possible with the right support. Fijians, both young and old, Pacific Islanders and citizens of all vulnerable nations, want the talking to stop and the action to begin. Issuing a blue bond is a way for us to instigate, a means to unlock investments for Fiji's blue economy ambitions. It is a means for us to address the current financing gaps ourselves, because we can't wait, nor do we intend to wait. Innovative approaches for financing ocean solutions will be critical to preventing runaway climate change, enforcing the 1.5-degree guardrail, and preserving the integrity of the ocean. That is the big picture, the goal, and indeed the vision. We therefore announce that Fiji will issue the Pacific's first blue bond in the summer of 2022, and that is the British summer, which is our winter, if we have a winter, to help raise funds for a program of cutting sustainable orientated projects, cutting edge, I should say, sustainable ocean orientated projects. This is Fiji's second sustainable development bond issue since the green bond was launched in 2017, which is of course listed on the London Stock Exchange. From now until March 2022, the government of Fiji will continue to work closely across the relevant ministries, industry stakeholders, UN agencies, and technical partners to further qualify, quantify, design, and articulate technically robust investments that we can realize from the blue bond proceeds. We're not over the finish line as of yet. As with our green bond issue, good optics don't always mean good interest rates. As part of our push for partnerships to help ensure this blue bond is as affordable as possible, the Permanent Secretary for Economy, who's here, who's also responsible for climate change, and I will be going to London next week, hopefully, to discuss market de-risking, structuring and placement opportunities for Fiji's blue bond issuance. In particular, we'll be meeting with the Sustainable Markets Initiative, SMI, we have one of the reps here too, championed by His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales in this regard. Thank you again to the UNDP, UNCDF, and the Government of UK for the generous contribution to the bond issuance process, and we look forward to welcoming investors in the second half of 2022 who are eager to catalyze innovation and be early movers to bring life initiatives that we can all be proud of. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, as we approach the 11th hour in the negotiations, the 11th hour in our opportunity to action change, we need to make sure that we use the remaining time and every opportunity to address the core drivers of the crisis we face. As the clock to achieve decisive ocean climate action is ticking down, our ambition and the pace of our innovation are winding up. We recognize that the transitions and policies we advocate for abroad, the projects we have planned at home, and the future we want will in fact be relegated to figments of our imagination without progress achieved here and now. I wish to thank you all for your support to make our ambition part of the touch and feel of the present. The future of our economy and future depend on it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Any initiative of the like of a blue bond issuance requires strong partners, and Fiji has the strongest partners that it could hope for in the UK government and the UN agencies. So it's my pleasure to introduce a panel where we'll be briefly describing the role of the partners in these types of initiatives. We have Andrea Ledward, Director for International Biodiversity and Climate from DEFRA in the UK, Achim Steiner, Administrator from the United Nations Development Programme, Preeti Sinha from the United Nations Development Fund, who is Executive Director there, and Stephen Lizars from His Royal Highness Prince of Wales Sustainable Markets Initiative. I'll be asking each of the panelists one question, and starting with Ms. Ledward. The British government's been a strong supporter of oceans and the blue economy and that agenda. It's been working with the Fiji government to help structure the Blue Bond. But not only that, you've also been co-chair with Fiji on the task force for access to climate finance that promotes these types of approaches. So can you tell us a little bit of how the UK is scaling its work in blue financing initiatives and its approach to this segment, or this developing segment in climate finance?
Well, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Thank you. So thank you for inviting the UK to speak here today. Lord Goldsmith is a very enthusiastic supporter of the Blue Bond Initiative, and I know that he sends his apologies. He has been busy in Parliament passing the Environment Act in the last 24 hours. But he is very excited about this initiative and wants to very much make sure that we move forward with continued engagement with the government of Fiji on this. The UK is really proud to be supporting the development of Fiji's first sovereign blue bond. It's very much part of our £500 million Blue Planet Fund that is supporting developing countries to build sustainable marine economies. The Blue Planet Fund was launched at the G7 earlier this year by the Prime Minister and supports our focus on protecting nature and tackling climate change in an integrated way, with programs on marine biodiversity loss, tackling marine pollution at source, making seafood more sustainable, and increasing people's resilience to climate change. Fiji's Blue Bond is very well aligned with the UK's ambition to help small island developing states access sustainable finance in order to effectively and sustainably manage their marine resources and build resilience and adapt to climate change. The ocean is the sink for environmental degradation and faces direct pressures from human activities. There is increasing understanding of the impact on the ocean from these pressures, as well as climate change, but still only 1% of global aid spending goes towards supporting the sustainable ocean economy. The Blue Planet Fund will help to address this gap, supporting initiatives such as this Blue Bond to leverage additional funding from the private sector. Investment to date hasn't been adequate or proportionate, and so public financing is critical to address and enhance investor confidence and unlock the private finance. And I know that the UK investment in particular will really help with the pipeline flow. I think we're helping particularly on issues around monitoring, verification, as well as some of the broader enabling environment issues. Through the Blue Planet Fund, we're very proud to support the government of Fiji, and by providing the main food source to almost half the world's population and regulating the climate and making it safe for life on Earth, the ocean is one of the most valuable assets. We are very much, as a UK, focused on finance, particularly as we go into the CBD. So as we come out of COP26, many of you will have seen over the last 10 days, there have been increasing amounts of new pledges on the ocean and on nature. And what we need to do now is make sense of all of that and understand where that's going to go, and particularly focus on access to that finance and ensure that the finance flows through to those who need it most. And so as soon as we leave here today, the UK delegation will be thinking very hard about implementation. We'll be focused on the legacy from coming out of Glasgow, and we'll also be looking ahead to this CBD and looking forward very much to working with Fiji as part of the High Ambition Coalition. We're going into that and making sure that finance and accountability are two of the really critical issues to make sure that we deliver progress on that new global biodiversity framework there. I think that's enough. I think that answers your question.
Thank you very much. Mr. Steiner, there's often a criticism with financial development finance institutions and the enormous amount of money that needs to be applied to the climate finance problem. And the UNDP sits in the middle of that and has a global reach. Can you talk a little bit about how the UNDP is leveraging finance into things like blue economy initiatives specifically?
Sure can, and Attorney General, Minister, dear fellow panelists, it's a great pleasure to be here together with my colleague also Priti Sinha, because I think what we are trying to do together with our colleagues in Fiji, in the UK and others is really to tackle a question that runs right through this whole COP, through the climate change challenge, the biodiversity challenge, but ultimately the challenge that Fiji is trying to address, which is how to finance a development pathway that allows it, as you said, Minister, to diversify, but also to decarbonize, to bring greater sustainability to the large marine ecosystem that defines Fiji's economic and ecological assets as a country. And I think what we have for many years known is that, first of all, public policy matters, but private finance is essential. And I think much of the work that we need to accomplish together today, and obviously the launch of a blue bond is an excellent demonstration of precisely the fusion of different strands of work. Clear public policy, an instrument that, even though it is a debt instrument, and let us be clear, I mean, it is still a debt instrument, so we have to tackle that also in the larger context of financing, allows private capital to essentially become a co-investor in a public good outcome. And this has been the great challenge in development finance for decades. How do you reconcile what ultimately is often defined as a very narrow view of investment return with what, by definition, a government, as a custodian of national interest, has to represent the public good? And I think it is against this backdrop that the design of a bond, including the kind of performance indicators, the KPIs, the monitoring, allow it to become an attractive instrument on the financial markets. This is what UNCDF works on, what we in UNDP over the last 3 years have invested heavily in what we call the finance sector hub, in order to develop the kinds of criteria that allow countries to go to the financial markets with SDG bonds. They may be green bonds, they may be blue bonds. We have opted as part of the development mandate that UNDP carries, because governments often want to raise instruments on different fronts. Whether it is a blue bond, a green bond, an SDG bond, the DNA of what makes it successful or not is not dissimilar. You have just spoken to some of it, you have spoken to it just now, Minister. I think where we are so keen to learn together with Fiji, that in fact was the first emerging economy to take a green bond to market, is that in fact the financial markets are ready, but we still have that sense of opportunities being lost in translation. And by translation, I mean, it's not that what a bond that the government of Fiji would issue is not compatible with where private sector fund managers would actually wish to invest. It's to connect these two worlds. And you invoked at the beginning that Fiji is about as far as you can get from Glasgow. There is a challenge. It's not always geographical. I mean, that adds to the challenge that one is perhaps, not on the highway of where finance traditionally invests. It looks for large economies, emerging economies, maybe where it is used to operate. Our objective as UNDP is to essentially crack this issue once and for all, that the world's financial markets need to be both accessible to and need to be engaged in countries across the globe. The kind of financial economy that simply picks out a few countries and leaves the rest essentially by the wayside is one reason why financing has become such a challenge in the broader development arena. And from that point of view, I hope that as Fiji goes to market next year, it is yet another example and a testimony of a well-designed instrument actually being able to be a bridge to literally trillions of dollars that are looking for ways to invest, but with a public good outcome being designed into it, and not simply a rate of return that maximizes an investor's return. And I think that is a frontier in finance that is extremely promising, and that I think also, His Royal Highness, many others have cultivated over years in terms of creating perhaps a different kind of market for development finance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that leads on very well into the role of UNCDF, which is a unique UN agency in that it focuses on least developed economies, but also the only UN agency that can lend and provide guarantees to the private sector. Now, Ms. Sinha, UNCDF has been very involved in Fiji, is a key technical partner, but is also doing things in Fiji to leverage private sector finance. Maybe you can explain a little bit more how the UNCDF actually executes that.
Thank you, Gregor, and good morning to all excellencies and colleagues here. First, I'd like to just acknowledge the Minister, Minister Aya's Saeed Qayyum, for his leadership and really congratulate the people of Fiji to have taken this initiative to move in this direction, to really attract global capital to the island. And I speak on behalf of my colleagues on the ground and the colleagues of UNDP, UNCDF, other partners, that we really are trying to bring this innovative structure of the blue bond to the market. So one of the roles that UNCDF has is really helping to be a financing agency. So as Gregor, you mentioned, in addition to the technical assistance that we offer, we can also offer a toolkit of financing instruments, loans, guarantees, blended funds, and this bond, and more. So what we are doing currently as CDF in partnership with UNDP on the ground is helping structure the pipeline, the investment pipeline, and they're working with the UK government, with the UK's Blue Planet Fund, and other partners. We're looking at marine protected areas, at green shipping, at fisheries. These are very, very vital areas for Fiji, as the Minister just mentioned. And we're helping create SMEs into which the proceeds of this bond could go, and therefore there could be returns, therefore out of the nature-based solutions into a global bond. We'll also be working with the Fiji government to reduce or look at the coupon rate that they can eventually achieve, and that will be, of course, a significant aspect of the blue bond as the Minister ably leads the delegation to global capital markets. And we really believe in the de-risking ability of donor capital coming in and therefore attracting private capital. So I have another example on that. In addition, we are working on the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, in addition to the bond. And there we are going to mobilize or have mobilized about $8 million into Fiji on about 3 projects. These are about landfills doing more recycling so that there's less leaching into the ocean, about fertilizer companies being more organic. And all of that will mobilize about $50 million more for the Fiji economy, again, bringing investors through the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, in which the UK government, again, is a partner through its great initiatives on the Blue Planet Fund. So to say in short that we really want the Fiji entrepreneurial spirit to emerge and partner with the government's leadership, and together we stand as partners, development partners, Akim Steiner here, the UNDP administrator, and our teams. We have the teams on the ground. They're working actively as we speak. We've been briefed by them, and we hope as well to be there soon to join that endeavor. So hopefully we can take the blue to be the new green and also help the COVID recovery as we get more funding into the islands. Thank you so much.
Fantastic, thank you. Mr. Lizars, the Sustainable Markets Initiative was formed by His Royal Highness as a global coalition of the willing to bring the large amount of money in the capital markets to bear on issues of sustainability and as a funding source. Now, it would be interesting for the audience to know, how does the Sustainable Markets Initiative work and achieve this? And more importantly, what are the key questions that private investors are asking? What do they want from the issuers of such instruments?
Thank you, Gregor. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies. It's an absolute pleasure to be on such a fantastic panel today. So let me just tell you a little bit about the Sustainable Markets Initiative to start. So as Gregor mentioned, it's a coalition of the willing. It's 300 global CEOs, so business leaders, who've been convened by His Royal Highness at the Sustainable Markets Initiative, which was launched at the beginning of last year. It's co-chaired by the Chairman and CEO of Bank of America, Brian Moynihan, and it's the CEOs striving to lead their businesses to accelerate along a sustainable pathway and collaborate together to overcome barriers where they can. We have a very strong financial sector element to the Sustainable Markets Initiative. We have a private equity task force, an insurance task force, and importantly a banking and an asset manager, asset owner task force as well. Unusually, the Sustainable Markets Initiative, the Secretariat, are all secondees. So I'm seconded myself. I work for NatWest, one of the sponsors of COP, and I bring a background in capital markets, structuring and advisory into that role. An important aspect is, again, as already been mentioned, the Sustainable Markets Initiative is trying to connect more private money into developing lower and medium income countries. We all know it needs to happen if we want to make the shifts that are necessary, and by convening this very impressive group of CEOs, we hope to be able to leverage that. To your second question, Gregor, what's going on in the green and blue bond market? I'd say the most important observation is the investor base, the institutional investor base, is increasingly sophisticated. It's not good enough just to do a greener bond or blue bond and meet the label. They're interested in the integrity of the issuer, the credibility. And that's why Fiji stands very well, because this is part of an integrated program. So it's very important to investors. They don't want to see greenwashing. They want to see issuers that are genuinely on a sustainable pathway. We still live in a low yield environment. Investors are increasingly looking for higher yields, and that's going to conflict with the desire of issuers to issue at lower yields. But increasingly issuers are looking for higher beta cyclical names, developing economies, and even investing in instruments such as hybrid debt or equity with the green label. So they're interested in doing things which are more sophisticated, and again, that's an important point. We can't forget that a green and blue bond is an investment still. Investors will still have to run the risk appetite and frameworks over the investment. They'll still look at issues of creditworthiness, currency, scale, and liquidity. All of those factors will still come into play, and it's important because just because it's blue or green does not overcome all those areas. And there are elements that we have to do to help mitigate those barriers and those risks and those appetites. I think there's some good news as well. I think we've increasingly seen a mature market. We see a lot of repeat issuers. So new or irregular and infrequent issuers are attractive because they create that portfolio diversification. So I think that's good news for infrequent and new issuers. We also saw quite a trend during COVID for social bonds. And I think that sort of crept across a little bit into green and blue. People are very interested in the social impact of the use of proceeds as well. And again, I think that speaks well to the projects that we're looking at here. When it comes to pricing, we have seen advantages in pricing for green and blue issuance versus vanilla issuance. The greenium, as it's called, it's relatively modest, but it exists. But it's important that we drive more of it, particularly for those countries where there's the greatest need to move forward. And then just looking forward a little bit about where this market is going. It was already been mentioned on the panel, this growth in sustainability-linked issuance, so which is less about the use of proceeds, but it's also about building in to the interest rate on the loan a key performance indicator. So if a country is able to deliver or achieve, it earns a lower rate of interest. If it fails on that, it pays a higher rate of interest. And I've seen some statistics in the corporate market, about 10% of issuance is going in that direction on sustainability linked. There's no reason you can't combine the two in one instrument as well. We're seeing some gold plating coming in, so people aligning the use of proceeds to taxonomies. We're also seeing institutional investors bypass the bond market entirely and invest directly with companies in particular, the private placement market. So this is it's an increasingly mature market. It's an increasingly a market that is prepared to do new things, take on more risk, and I think that's very attractive coming into the space. We've got something so worthy as this instrument and this issuance. So to sum up, from the Sustainable Markets Initiative point, we have fantastic connectivity. We like to play that into this and make the world smaller and bring these investors to bear. And we're looking very much to working with this distinguished panel to make this as successful as possible.
Thank you very much. So that just about wraps it up for today, for the Blue Bond announcement. I'd like to hand over to the Honourable Minister to ask him whether he's got any closing message, short message for people who might be asking why a blue bond issuance and what this represents for the company. Any closing message you'd like to give the audience?
I'll be very, very brief because I know that people have to go to other events. But I think for us, by having a blue bond, it specifically targets the blue economy, and we wanted that, to place emphasis on that. As we've done with the green bonds, we have third-party validation that the actual proceeds from the green bonds go to those programs or projects that were targeted under the green bonds. So similarly, we want to do that for the blue bonds. And as I mentioned, understand that we need to build credibility with the investors. There could be some conditions laid where once you achieve those targets, you actually have some pricing, hopefully, differential in terms of better pricing for those. And I think for us it's critically important. It does tick off a number of boxes in terms of obviously, improving the well-being of the ocean, getting more sort of oxygen out, getting better carbon sequestration. It also helps protects our coastlines too, for example, mangroves, we've also come up with a number of nature-based solutions that need to be funded. I mean, seawalls is in huge demand in Fiji. So we're moving away, and we moved away, in fact, from the traditional concrete seawall. We're doing, boulders with vetiver grass planted in between. We've got mangroves also as a second barrier of protection, or first barrier, I should say, of protection. And that also builds, various ecosystems around that. So there's a whole gambit of areas that we want to address. There's also the opportunity to bring a lot of women into the mariculture sector. For example, in Fiji, we grow pearls, the black pearls. So a lot of women have come up with projects. But we don't want a project-driven program. We want a programmatic-driven funding. So it addresses it in a kind of holistic manner. What we currently find in many of these is that somebody will come along and say, we'll fund one project, but there's no sort of interlinkages. So I think the idea to build sustainability and also develop a proper, economic viable proposition, we need to take a holistic approach. And we, of course, look forward to working with all our partners here, in particular SMI, and we hope that SMI will, open up a lot of doors for us, working together with the agencies that are here, and of course the UK government too. You'll have to deliver at this COP. So this will be actually a sign of your success in respect to this. Thank you very much, Naka. And thank you all for attending. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Honourable Minister. Thank you, Ms. Ledward, Mrs. Steiner, Ms. Sina, and Mr. Lazars. That's a wrap from the Fiji Blue Bond announcement at COP26. Thank you very much.